Thanks, Wendy, for making clear that what matters is perception, not reality. That's something that we all need to ponder. And I hope all of you got your awards. Yesterday, we ended up with an award ceremony in a room where pretty much all of us, we got an award. And prior to that, there was a guy, he said to call him Oranges, and I don't think he's here now. He also spoke on something similar to what Wendy said today, but slightly different. A couple of things that he said really stood out for me. One, he said that if you want to attract attention, you better be a purple cow, not a black, white, brown, or any other color. And so if you're a purple cow, you attract attention. The second he said is, if you do not make yourself known within the first 9 seconds, then better give up. The purple cow would get eaten, almost. Now, if I were to attract your attention and hold it within the first 9 seconds, I probably will have to transform myself into Deepika Padukone or someone of that sort. And that's not going to be possible. I wouldn't even attempt it. So let me start with a bit of a story. There was this very well-known, knowledgeable American professor, multiple degrees in neurosciences, psychology, and everything else. And who knew everything that there was to know about the mind, how he could make people behave differently, make them happy, and so on and so forth. And then some of his students started, in some discussions, telling him, you know, we hear about this guy who makes people happy. And just being in the presence of this guy, people feel happy. There's something magical about him. The professor was not only intrigued, he was very upset. Who's this guy? He said, you know, he's a monk. He lives out in the mountains in India. His name is Dalai Lama. So the professor said, oh, I need to go and meet this guy and find out what it's all about. So he fixes appointment with Dalai Lama with great difficulty. And he lands there. And those of you who know about the Dalai Lama, he's quite timeless. He doesn't care about time. It's very elastic. So it's about an hour before the guy can meet him, though he had an appointment and everything. And he's very upset. And but Dalai Lama comes and receives him. Tremendous amount, if you've seen him, the smile of the Dalai Lama fills the whole room. And he smiles at him, hugs him, he takes him, and he serves him tea. And the professor starts talking about all that he wants to talk about, how good he is, how famous he is. So Dalai Lama starts pouring the tea. And as the professor watches, the tea is filling the cup and it's overflowing. And the professor gets very upset. He shouts out, hey, can't you see? The cup is full and it's overflowing. So Dalai Lama smiles at him and he says, yeah, so is your mind. It's overflowing. Why don't you let it become empty? From mindful, can you become mindless? And then probably wisdom will come to you. And one of you referred today to Marshall talking about letting go. And then if you're letting go, you also let it come. And there's a guy called Otto Scharmer who talks about a theory called Theory U. If you're all coaches, if you're interested in coaching, I would strongly recommend that you read 2 people. One is Otto Scharmer. His Theory U is about how you can go deeper and deeper into yourself, into a state what I would call mindlessness rather than mindfulness. And in that state, you achieve something called the generative visioning, generative listening of the person in front of you. And this is very much similar to what Carl Rogers said about, those of you who have read Carl Rogers, about unconditional positive regard, which is about complete client centricity. That if you're a coach, the person in front of you is who matters, not you. The coach has to be completely non-judgmental. And that state, the mindless state, Alistair was supposed to put on the Coacharya logo somewhere, but unfortunately he's not here. Let me see if I can get it up. Essentially, the concept that we tried to develop was that when we move out of awareness of mind and the body, we are able to move into a state of energy, as it were. And the zero state and the infinity state are about the same. They are both asymptotic. When you are in zero, that means the mind and the body disappear, the awareness of the mind and body disappear. You are at a state where you are completely be able to feel the energy of another person. It's almost like the Einsteinian theorem of E equals mc square. The matter disappears and energy reappears in its place. Now, why does it matter in coaching? It's mainly because when we are a coach, when we are coaching, thank you very much. So there's the zero and the infinity, so let me not go back into all that. When I relate this concept to something which is a buzzword today, which is mindfulness, practically everybody who in the recent times has been in touch with many of the advances in the United States and so on, it's all about mindfulness. And mindfulness is considered to be a Buddhist word. And yesterday, I think Alistair's partner used this word, fake news. The mindfulness, unfortunately, is fake news. It's nothing to do with Buddhism. It was an incorrect translation by someone of a word that Buddha used, which was sati, which meant memory. And both in the Hindu and the Buddhist theology and philosophy, memory is a bad word. Memory is about the conditioned experiences that we hold inside. It's like in the Freudian Jungian concept, at the bottom of the iceberg, all the negativities that you have, the guilt, the shame, the regret, the lust, everything else, the fear and everything, all that is really associated with what is called memory. What Buddha spoke about was a concept called sunya, which meant the void, which meant the emptiness. And to him, that meant a complete disengagement with what the mind does, with what the cognition is about. And that was translated in many other ways. In Zen, it is called the no mind. In Buddhism and Zen, it is called the beginner's mind. And in Hinduism, from which this concept was derived by Buddha, it is called the fourth state of awareness. The fourth state of awareness, which is called turiya, is a state in which you move beyond the thinking. You move beyond the thoughts into merely a disengaged witnessing of what thoughts are. This is a state of the coach that has been talked about by Carl Rogers when he talks about unconditional positive regard, when he talks about empathy, when he talks about congruence. And he also says this is a state in which the coach becomes aware. And those of you who are coaches with ICF terminologies of various competencies, unfortunately, ICF does not have a competency which clearly reproduces this particular quality. The closest it comes to is something called presence. And we define presence as absence. A coach is present when the coach is actually absent. The coach's ego is absent. The coach's mind is absent. When all that the coach is bothered about is what is happening in front of them with the client. And that is what Otto Scharmer calls the generative visioning. Are you able to look at the client, not in terms of what the client is saying at this point in time, but in terms of where the client wishes to be? Are you able to imagine that situation where you are addressing the client as the client wants to be in terms of the desired outcome? And are you able to move the client into that space? So in our mastery programs, the thing that we start with, the competency, is not the typical ICF model, but the whole quality of presence as absence. And when you start with presence, the coach's awareness in terms of being unconditionally, positively regarding the client and generatively listening, you come to a state, it's no longer about communication, it's about a communion. When the coach is absent and is energetically communicating, it becomes a communion. So what I'm leaving with you is really a state where you can reach that mindless awareness state. You can reach that fourth state of awareness that you can't do by what is today being called as a mindful state. In a mindful state, all that you're really applying is your cognition. at best, some attention to emotion. Alistair here is an expert on neurosciences. The brain waves today are known to have 5 wave patterns. The normal state that we are conversing now is called the beta state, 12 to 20 hertz. When you become reflective, slightly meditative, you move into what's called the alpha, 8 to 12. This is what most people describe as a meditative state. And you go below that, you get into theta and delta, deep meditation, deep sleep. I was a spiritual healer at one time, and I was practicing meditation. This was about 25 years ago. And there were a couple of guys who were doing research. They were British, they were in Singapore. And they said, we have this technology which photographs you, and we'll be able to show your colors as they change, your energy state. I was very skeptical. So I asked them, okay, tell me beforehand what's going to happen. What is it that you would expect to happen? And I explained to him the process of meditation I did. They said, you say that you're going to do a healing meditation, and you would see that your body color is changing into green from whatever color it starts with. So they did time-lapse photography for over 20 minutes, and I still have them in my computer somewhere. And over a period of time, it was amazing that actually the color changed to green. At one point in time, I looked like an Irishman in a parade. And there was only one point in my body which was black. And they said, look, you better check this out. Eventually, it turned out I have a lower back problem. And I have done this after that a couple of times with them. Then they put me on a skull cap with multiple thingies out there, and they measured my brainwave pattern. They said, we got bad news for you. You're not meditating. I said, I don't know, but I turned green, didn't I? I said, no, you turned green, but you're not meditating. So I said, why am I not meditating? He said, you should be in the alpha range, 8 to 12. But this thing, they had up to 20 or 22 or something. The needle is hitting the end of the range. They can't figure out what the heck you're doing. And this was sometime in, probably 1990s, 1990, 1992. Believe you me, and this is truth, in 2008, Sir Herbert Johnson, who was a professor at the Harvard Medical School, discovered something called the gamma waves. When he was working on the Tibetan monks, the lamas, when they were going through the initiation rites. And they were in deep meditation. What the monks were asked to do was to sit out in the snow, in the open, at the height of winter at Lhasa, naked, and they were given a wet cloth to wear. And within a certain period of time, the cloth had to dry. And the cloth dried, they passed initiation tests, and they were taken into as monks. Benson measured that, and the waves went up to something like 40, 50 hertz. So after this was, I think, around 2008, 2009. A couple of years later, I had myself tested, and my meditative range was somewhere around 40 plus. So the whole point of even what meditation is completely changed now with this discovery. It's not about relaxation. Meditation is something tremendously active. It can lead into states where you can perform at much better levels. You don't have to be like some kind of a monk or a sannyasi that you can think of who is sitting out there meditating, Buddha meditating on his navel or whatever it is. That's not what meditation is. Meditation can be something far more powerful. It can lead to something far more active. Those of you who are familiar with Indian mythology, it's like Shiva dancing. When Shiva is dancing, he's in meditation. He's in deep meditation. The entire universe changes according to what he does. That's a state you can move into while you are in front of a client. You can influence a client with your own energy. You can take them to a completely different space. And that is the state which we call the fourth state of awareness in the Hindu Upanishads, called the Mandukya Upanishad and others. I guide people through these meditations. I do programs in them. But I can't teach them. But you can learn them because these are experiential processes. These are not things that you just understand what it is about and I practice and happen, but actually through the practice and experience you would be able to do it. So when I talk about mindless meditation or mindless coaching moving into leadership, one of the most important thing that happens to all of us when we get into that state of mindlessness, as it were, and this I experienced for the first time, some of you may be familiar with it, a meditation process called Vipassana, which is a Buddhist process of 10 days where you spend in complete silence. The first 3 days you are completely watching your breath. The next few days you start watching your body from head to toe. And at some process, you go beyond that breath and the body to a state which is completely different. And when you are in that state, that is where the mindless state happens. You are no longer bothered about yourself. You are no longer you. You are only bothered about others outside. You move from what I would call a me state into a we state. And at that point in time, you truly become a leader. Because there aren't any followers you are trying to inspire or influence. Everybody else is equal to you. They're also leaders. It's not about servant leadership or some other kind of leadership, the 5th level or the 6th level and all that kind of stuff. But there's leadership at the highest levels where everyone around you, you believe, has exactly the same potential or even more than what you have. And for coaching today, especially for those of you who are engaged in what Peter Hawkins talks about, the systemic coaching, we are working with teams and organizations together along with individuals. It's an extraordinarily powerful pathway to move towards. So I'll stop here if you have any questions. Otherwise, I really don't want to take too much time on this to go beyond. Yeah. Yeah. There is a book by a guy called D.T. Suzuki, who probably one of the greatest masters in Zen. He talks about the concept of no mind. And there is a Hindu scriptural Upanishad called the Mandukya Upanishad. The problem with all of them is they are epigrammatic. It's if I were to just tell you and leave it at that as presence is absence, or communication to communion. And if I don't explain with you and sit down and take you through it, you're not going to get very far. That's the way the scriptures were written. Unfortunately, the Hindu scriptures and the Buddhist scriptures were not really written like parables of Jesus, where there's a story, and at the end of the story, there's a moral, and you are able to understand. Purely from a coaching perspective, if you want to relate that, yes, on Becoming a Person by Carl Rogers, and Theory U by Otto Scharmer. They both talk about the theories which are extremely powerful, which can take you into that state. And at some point in time, if you really want to, if you want to learn about the mindless meditation, we conduct webinars quite often, and at least the meditative part is not difficult. You can always join us and learn about the meditation.
Any more questions? Yes, we have one here.
Yes, you mentioned coaching within the coaching context that presence is absence. Could you elaborate more about that?
Okay. Tell me a little bit about what is your understanding of presence in coaching?
The coach, when he or she is being present with the client or the coachee, is that I am dedicating my full attention and my focus on you with the intention to help you and be with you at your current state and your current emotional state. So I'm with you. I'm not trying to be, I will not lose focus on you until the coaching session is over.
Brilliant. When that is happening with the client, in terms of how you are trying to be with the client, what is happening to you? Have you ever looked within yourself and see what's happening to you? Learning is cognitive. What else is happening to you at your being level? What's going on in your mind?
I'm losing myself.
While losing yourself, are you learning? By losing? Tell me how. Okay, the question is, are you thinking? When you are trying to lose yourself, and when you say all this, is that a thought that is happening to you? I'm not asking you a trick question. There are many people, even master coaches, who tell me when they are coaching, they note down. And I ask them, if you note down at that point in time, are you listening? The brain cannot do both these at the same time. It's impossible. The moment you start noting down, you lose focus on the listening. The same way, the moment the coach starts thinking about something, I need to be able to help the client. This is what I need to do. There's an inner dialogue going on. At that point in time, you are no longer present. So what is needed is really for you to go deep within yourself, and can you understand what is happening to you in that process? Unfortunately, ICF doesn't have that competency. But if you go through the European Mentoring Coaching Council, the first competency is understanding self. And within that understanding self, there's a lot of depth in terms of your needing to understand who you are. What's happening to you while you're coaching? And it's a meditative process. It's not religious. It's very, very non-denominational. It's there in every religion. And you go in yourself, can you watch what is happening to you when you are doing that? And when you do that, then there are no thoughts in you. There is no ego. There is no identity. I'm not Ramanathan who is sitting in front of you trying to coach you. I'm a blank. And that's what I mean by presence is absence. At that point in time, I may not even need to communicate in words to you. There is something that can happen between us, almost like a thought transference. And again, I'm not being funny. It can happen. I can prove it to you to be able to understand what that means. So it is possible for every one of us to go into that deep state. And I believe that if you really want to gain mastery in coaching, that is the level at which you need to go. One of the few people who does it beautifully today, she is not credentialed by any institution, a lady called Fiona Adamson, and she came on Kocharia and did a webinar with us. And the way that she works with you is called transpersonal coaching. So John Whitmore, in the last edition of his Coaching for Performance, talked about transpersonal coaching. And it's really spiritual coaching. Transpersonal means you are going beyond the persona. You're going beyond the ego. It's no longer about the mind and the body, the cognition. Right? Thanks for asking the question.